So thank you everyone for coming. Thanks to those online for joining us. It was a good turnout. A lot of people registered from all over the world, so that's really nice to see. Thank you for being interested in our webinar series. This is the first webinar of the academic year, and we have Chelsea Sherrington. She's a second-year master's student presenting her work around musculoskeletal disorders. And so she'll present for about 30 minutes. And for those that are online, if you're new to our webinars, you can post questions in the chat box anytime you want. I'll monitor them throughout, and then we'll ask them at the end. So after her 30-minute presentation, roughly, we'll give her about 10-15 minutes for questions, and it will be posted online afterwards. It might take a day or two, but it'll be on CROSH.ca under resources, so you can always go back and refer to the webinar there as well. So with that, thank you very much, Chelsea, for agreeing to present to us today, and you can begin whenever you're ready.
Great. Thank you, Brandon. My name is Chelsea. I'm here to talk to you today about musculoskeletal disorders, or MSDs, the risk factors, and some prevention strategies. So we'll go through a little bit of the background information on MSDs. We'll talk about what they are, and then we'll go through how to understand and identify the risk factors for MSDs and some prevention strategies associated with them. But first off, why do we care? Why do we need to know what MSDs are and what the risk factors are? Well, we need to care because musculoskeletal disorders are one of the most common lost time claims accepted by WSIB in Ontario. The latest statistic is that 43% of work-related injuries are MSDs. So that's about 1 in every 10 Canadians, or 2.3 million Canadians age 20 and older are experiencing an MSD injury at some point in their life. So what is an MSD? It is an injury or a disorder that affects the body's musculoskeletal system or the movement systems. This can be muscles, ligaments, tendons, nerves, blood vessels, anything like that. And it develops as a result of repetitive use in a way that causes stress to these systems. There's a lot of names for MSDs. You might have heard repetitive strain injuries, cumulative trauma disorder, repetitive motion injuries. It all encapsulates the same thing. It all falls under that definition. It all can be considered an MSD. So if you think about texting, right, is the big one right now. It's not a difficult task. We do it all the time, but it does qualify, as an MSD if you get an injury from texting. That's one of my last examples is de Quervain syndrome, tendonitis of the thumbs, often caused by texting. That repetitive motion of typing, touching your screen, qualifies as an MSD. Other examples are tennis elbow, low back pain is very, very common, rotator cuff tendonitis, carpal tunnel syndrome, all those types of injuries are MSD injuries. So what's the first thing you need to know to understand MSDs? It's that the human body is a machine. So all of the laws of physics that apply to any regular machine apply to our body as well. If you think about a car moving at a constant speed, it wants to stay at that constant speed. I'm sure we've all heard of that at some point in our life. Our body is the same. It requires force to move to do any of the activities we need to do throughout our day. The second thing is that there is a difference between can we and should we. So you see in the first picture, he's bending over to pick up the box and he's bending forward at his hips. He's not bending his legs. I'm sure everybody's heard of bend your knees to use your legs to lift. So why is he bending at his hips? Well, can he? Absolutely. Will he accomplish the task of picking the box up off the ground? More than likely. Will he get injured? We don't know. Should we use the better posture and use what we know are the bigger muscle groups in our legs to pick up the box? Yes, but as a species, we've developed to use the more energy efficient way. So if you don't consciously think about how you're going to lift up that box, chances are you'll probably bend forward and just pick it up the first way that you think of. And that's often bending forward at the hips. That's just one example. One of the most detrimental phrases that I've heard is we've always done it that way. So it's comfortable. There's a procedure in place. That's just how it's done. And it's uncomfortable to make that change, but just because that's the way it's always been done doesn't mean it's the way that it needs to continue. There are always new technologies. There's more and more research coming out, newer information. We have a better understanding of how our bodies work, and more technology coming available to us. So maybe there's a better way now, and having that open mind to what's new and the information coming to us, just because it's always been done that way doesn't mean it's still the right way to do it. And the last thing I want you to understand is that the human body is different from a machine in the sense that we have a self-repairing or self-maintaining system in our body. So we're equipped with a repair crew 24/7. If you get injured, your body is going to work as hard as it can to heal that injury. But just like a repair crew or a mechanic that goes out and fixes cars all day, if you have too much work to do and you swamp your repair crew, eventually they're going to give up. They're going to get fatigued, and it'll take way longer to heal that injury if you ever fully heal at all. So the signs and symptoms are slow. It usually starts with a little bit of fatigue or discomfort, maybe some stiffness. You know, you wake up in the morning, your shoulder's a little bit sore. As you go through your day, it feels better, and you think, oh, okay, well, it mustn't have been that bad. It feels better, I must not be injured. But you keep doing the same tasks, you go to work, you do the same thing every day, and then it starts to get a little bit tingly. But that tingliness goes away eventually, maybe after a couple of days. And as soon as that symptom goes away, you think, okay, well, I'm okay now, I don't have any symptoms, I must be better. That if you continue and you kind of ignore those symptoms, you keep doing the same repetitive tasks all the time, that can eventually lead to continuous pain, which is a lot harder to deal with than the early symptoms, and it can also lead to a loss of function eventually if the tasks are continuing to be done and there is no intervention there. So early symptom recognition and early intervention will definitely help to prevent long-term problems. The earlier you can detect those signs and recognize what's causing those issues or those symptoms, the more chance you'll have of an early and quick recovery. So there are 7 major risk factors associated with MSDs. The top 3 or 4 are the most commonly known and probably the most talked about. The last 3 are definitely task specific. So it depends what you're doing, whether they're going to be a risk factor or not, but I will go through all of them and give some prevention strategies for all 7. So the first one is awkward postures. So any body position that is a non-neutral or moves to a joint and range of motion, this places increased stress on the muscles, on the joints, nerves, all those systems. And when you think of non-neutral or an awkward position, you can see in some of the photos at the bottom that includes working overhead, kneeling, reaching out, any type of twisting or craning of your neck, moving, looking down all the time, looking up lots. That's all considered an awkward posture. But if you want to know how to tell, you just need to know what neutral is. So a neutral body position is a posture that assumes a natural stress-free position in the muscles, tendons, and ligaments. And this is where you're properly aligned. So if you just stood up and let your arms fall back up straight, looking forward, that's your neutral position. Your body is assumed to be in the least amount of stress with your joints in that spot. Anything that deviates away from the body, so bringing your arm up, maybe it's twisting your wrist, turning your head, whatever it may be, anything that deviates from that midline is considered a non-neutral posture. So what are some of the solutions for awkward postures? You want to position yourself as close to the work as possible. You want to try to avoid reaching out for any extended period of time. There are different levels of work depending on the type of work you're doing. So if it's small, fine hand movements, you want to bring the work up a little bit closer so you're not bending forward so much, looking down. If it's just kind of average, light work like keyboarding, anything between chest and waist height is ideal for that. And if it's anything that requires any heavy movement or heavy lifting, you want to bring it a little bit lower, about waist height, so that you give your arms and your upper body a little more leverage to work on that heavy work. You want to try and maintain a neutral spine as much as possible. So keeping your back up straight, avoiding the twisting, especially if you're lifting or pushing, pulling anything. You want to work near your elbow height, like I just talked about. Avoid overhead work as much as possible. So if you can bring yourself up to the work, if it's in a high place, that's best. And taking short breaks or micro breaks, you'll hear me talk about them a lot throughout the presentation. And a micro break doesn't have to be long. It can be 30 seconds, it can be a minute. Just taking a second to change that posture. If you can't avoid the awkward posture, then maybe coming out of it, bringing yourself back to a neutral, doing a couple stretches, and then getting back into whatever you're doing. And you definitely want to try and look at your job and choose the proper tools that allow for a neutral grip. So anything that avoids moving your wrist too much in any direction will be best. And if you have the right tool for the job, chances are you'll be able to avoid some of the awkward postures. The next one is force of movement, and all that is heavy lifting, pushing, pulling, carrying, those sorts of tasks. Anything that requires a significant amount of force from the muscles to perform the task is considered a force of movement. And that just causes muscles to fatigue a little more quickly. This is a very subjective risk factor. As humans, we're all different. We all have different strengths. So a heavy task for one person may not be a super heavy task for a different person. But the more forceful the movements are, the more you will be at risk of straining muscles, irritating tendons, joints, discs, all of that kind of stuff. And so depending on how often you do it as well, you might be able to lift it once, but lifting it 2, 3, 4 times might be too much for your body. One of the biggest examples that I can think of is a nurse who has to move a patient. You pick them up, and you might be able to move that patient once, but the second time you go to do it, now your muscles are tired. It's too much for you to lift. So being aware of what your limits are. Some solutions for these are using any assistive devices if you can. So a cart, cranes, patient lifts, if you are in that situation. You can find a partner. If you know it's too heavy for you to lift on your own, or if you're not sure, maybe you have to do it a few times a day. Get help if you can, as long as you can still pick it up safely and avoid those awkward postures. Ensure that the tools and equipment are in good repair. So you don't want anything to be slipping or falling, anything that causes you to do that jerk reaction. Because as soon as you jerk, now your muscles are producing a high amount of force very quickly, and that increases your risk. So anything that starts to fall, you want to make sure everything's set up well. And again, using the right tool for the job, making sure if you are using those assistive devices that they're able to lift what you need them to, and doing it safely. The biggest thing, if you are using the assistive devices too, is adjustability. If you have a cart that you got to pick something up off of and it's too low, then you get into that awkward posture situation. If it's too high, again, you're in that awkward posture situation. So making sure you have the tools to put your body in an optimal position to be able to do the work you need to do. The third one is repetitive movements. So keyboarding is probably one that we all think of right away as soon as we hear repetition. And it's just activities that load the same muscle group without enough rest in between those tasks. It's also known as a repetitive strain injury, and it can lead to tendonitis, bursitis, muscle strains. But what is too much repetition? It's a very, very difficult thing to quantify, because you might be able to type for an hour, you might be able to type for weeks or years even without feeling any symptoms. And unless you feel the symptoms, how do you know that it's too much repetition? So a good way to think about it is if you spend more than 50% of the task doing the same motion, then it's repetitive. So if you're on an assembly line and you have to grab a part from here and put it over here, and you spend more than 50% of your work task doing this motion, moving side to side, the same thing, now it's repetitive. You might have to do it, like if you're looking at it, you might have to look at it over the course of a couple of weeks, over the course of a month, depending on the tasks that are involved in your job. But that's one way to try and think about it and decide if it is a repetitive movement or not. Some of the solutions are task rotation. One thing that you have to keep in mind, though, if you're doing task rotation, is the muscle groups that you're working. So you might go from typing sitting down to typing standing up, or typing to scanning something in the copier, but are you working the same muscle groups in those two tasks? If you are, then you're not actually giving your muscles a break. So you want to try and pick two tasks that work two different muscle groups and rotate between those. It can be your own tasks at work, it can be switching with a coworker, anything you need to do to be able to rotate between them. You want to make sure you're using proper postures and try to use the larger muscle groups. So like we talked about the lifting, you want to try and use your legs. Those larger muscle groups do have a little bit more force. They're a little less susceptible to getting tired quickly, so less likely to get injured with repetitive movements. You want to try and stay fit. And when I say fit, I don't just mean big and strong and lots of muscle strength. You do need that muscle strength, but flexibility is needed as well. I said injury occurs when a joint hits that end range of motion, and if you have a little more flexibility, hopefully that means you have a little more range of motion as well, and you shouldn't be hitting that end point of your joint as quickly. So both strength and flexibility are important to keep in mind when you think about staying fit and ready for your job. Make changes to reduce repetition where possible, and those micro breaks again, standing up, taking a second to stretch out whatever muscles you've been using, maybe take a walk if you have to, taking that 30 seconds to a minute to give your muscles a break, and then get back into whatever you're doing. And take as much time as you need to plan the job. If you rush into it, maybe you have to walk back and forth now to get the tools because you didn't realize you needed all of these things. Maybe you do it more than once because you assembled something and you disassembled it and now you got to put it back together. Take the time, plan the job, know what you need to do, and that should help avoid some of the repetition involved in the task. The fourth one is sustained posture. We're all probably pretty familiar with this one. Anybody in an office job is definitely susceptible to this. But a sustained posture doesn't just have to be sitting. It's any position that's held for a long period of time. And this causes muscles to fatigue, and that affects your strength, it affects your endurance, your coordination. So you think about anybody who's from Sudbury driving to Toronto, right? You start out and you're happy and woohoo, we're going to Toronto and it's gonna be so much fun, and you got two hands on the wheel and you're just ready to go. And then you hit Perry Sound and you notice that maybe now you've got one hand on the wheel and your arm's kind of leaning against the window. You're not quite slouching yet, but you're leaning a little bit. You get to Barrie and now you've got like one hand on the wheel and you're sitting way back in your chair and you're feeling a little bit stiff, a little bit sore. And by the time you get to Toronto, you're like, oh my goodness, get me out of this car. I can't stay in this position any longer.
Just when you hit traffic.
Yeah. Yeah, that you see that traffic ahead of you and you think, oh, I should have gotten out at Barrie. But that's because our muscles aren't meant to hold us in that one position for an extended period of time, right? You think, oh my goodness, I'm so tired and all I did was sit in a car. But your muscles have been working hard all day to keep you in that seated position and they didn't get a break. So even though it doesn't seem like a task that requires a lot of effort, you actually put your muscles through quite a bit of stress that day. So how do you avoid this? Again, task rotation, making sure that you use two different muscle groups if you are going to do the task rotation. Change positions at work. So if you're doing something where you're kneeling, maybe you have one knee down, switch knees, stand up for a second, those micro breaks come back into play, move around. Anything that allows you to change where the pressure is in your body or change position, even if it's for a few seconds, will help to alleviate some of that muscle tension that occurs when you stay in one position for too long. If you can't avoid those prolonged awkward postures, try and use a supported position. So anything, if you have to lean out to the side, if you've got something that you can rest your arm on, now you're supporting that side of your body. Not all your body weight is moving through one side. Resting your arm on something will bring up other risk factors that we'll talk about later. but a supported position, maybe if it's your head, like having something to rest your head on, something to rest your feet on, whatever it may be, that'll help to kind of alleviate some of that muscle tension that builds up. And set a timer. So we all get into our work. You start doing whatever you need to do, and you think, oh, I'm almost done, I'm just gonna finish it. Okay, a couple more minutes and I'll be done for the day. And then a couple minutes turns into a couple hours, and suddenly you haven't moved from your whatever position you were in because you just wanted to get the work done. So setting a timer, I find, is very helpful. If you notice, okay, at half an hour I'm getting tired, maybe set a timer for 20 minutes and bring a smaller water bottle to work with you so that at 20 minutes, you now have to go and fill up your water bottle. Maybe after the next 20 minutes, now you have to go to the washroom because you've been drinking so much water. Or even just, okay, yeah, my timer went off. I'm going to stand up for a second, or I'm going to sit down for a second. I'm going to wiggle around a little bit to loosen up those muscles that are getting tight. The next one is local and whole body vibration. So hand-arm vibration, just when the vibrating tool transfers that vibration into the worker's fingers, palm, and forearm. Some of the symptoms are numbness, tingling, blanching, or getting that white look to your fingertips. And that can result in a reduced grip strength, a little bit less dexterity, and it can cause some significant pain. Whole body vibration is just when the vibration is transferred from whatever piece of equipment you're on through your butt. Currently, the definition of whole body vibration includes foot transmitted vibration as well, but we now know that it is very different from whole body vibration, so I'll talk to you a little bit about foot transmitted vibration in a second. But with the whole body, riding on any piece of machinery that vibrates can cause this, and you get very similar symptoms, just in a different part of your body. So you still get that numbness, tingling, pain, and a little bit of loss of balance. With the foot transmitted vibration, it's very similar to the symptoms that you get from hand transmitted vibration, but it's just in your feet. So instead of your fingers turning a little bit white, your toes will turn white. You get that tingling numbness in your feet, and it can travel up into your legs as well. So there are two different solutions for the different types of vibration. First is the hand-arm. Using anti-vibration gloves or wrap. These just help to absorb some of the vibration that's coming off of that tool before it hits your hand. They are a little bit thick, so you feel that it's like a jelly material most of the time. What you want to be careful of is the different materials used in these products are graded for different frequencies or levels of vibration. So when you're choosing the appropriate glove or wrap, you want to look at the manufacturing information and know what frequency of vibration your tool is putting out and what frequency of vibration the gloves or the wrap has been tested for. You want to maintain and balance your tools. So if your tool is well maintained, it'll likely put out a little bit less vibration. Or if it's heavy and you have it on a tool balancer, it'll take out some of the weight of the tool. So the less you have to grip that tool, the less tension there is in your muscles, and the less the vibration will travel through your hand further up into your forearm. Proper training, knowing what to look for. Unfortunately, with vibration, the symptoms aren't there until they are. And once you get them, there's not really a known way as of right now to reverse them. So knowing what to look for while you're using the tool, because you might use maybe an impact and you notice your hand starts to get a little numb, but you stop for a second and it goes away. Vibration is cumulative, the effects are cumulative. So if you say, okay, the tingling's gone and you go back to using it, now it's just added on. You do have more exposure and you are increasing your risk the more you use those vibrating tools. You want to reduce your exposure time as much as possible. And then in the cold, you want to try and protect those extremities. Try and use warm gloves if you can, or work in a warm place. Vibration causes your blood vessels to narrow a little bit, and so does the cold. So the cold will exacerbate any of the symptoms that you get from the vibrating tools. And you want to try and purchase the vibration dampening tools whenever possible. So for whole body, again, you want to try and limit your exposure time. It is cumulative, just like the hand-arm vibration. If you have air ride seats, you want to make sure they're properly adjusted for your body. You want to maintain equipment in roadways. Just like the maintenance of a hand tool, the maintenance of a roadway will reduce the amount of vibration that's brought through the equipment into the person's body. So making sure the suspension and the tires as well and the equipment is well maintained will help to reduce some of that vibration. You want to report road conditions, because if you're not reporting them, then nobody knows where to fix them. Nobody knows that the road is not good. You want to provide anti-vibration cushions, and the same rule applies to these cushions. You want to make sure that you're using the appropriate material for the appropriate piece of equipment. So looking at the manufacturing details and information, and knowing which type of material is right for that piece of equipment. And you want to choose the proper machinery for the job. I've said it a bunch already, right? Choosing the right tool will help to reduce the risk. Next, we have extreme temperatures, which we're all pretty used to here in Canada. You get the extreme cold in the winter and the extreme hot for a few weeks in the summertime. So working in either of these extreme temperatures isn't good. Our body wants to be kind of at a nice neutral temperature. The extreme hot can lead to dehydration, exhaustion. We've all heard of heat stress or heat exhaustion, and that can cause your muscles to fatigue quicker. Your muscles get tired. We kind of start to get a little sloppy. We don't keep our posture as nice. We maybe try and rush through things, and that's generally when injuries occur. And then with the extreme cold, it can lead to frostbite, hypothermia. That decreased blood flow in your muscles can lead to an increase in stiffness or numbness in the joints. And that decreased blood flow will lead to a faster time to muscle fatigue. So same thing, if you're getting tired, maybe we start to get a little sloppy. So to prevent any of these symptoms, or to prevent heat stress or hypothermia, using the proper personal protective equipment. If you are working outside, having protective equipment for your hands, your feet, anything that can keep you either cool or warm, depending on what temperature you're in. Consuming a lot of water in hot conditions, keeping yourself hydrated, wearing layers of clothing. So if you do get too hot, you can take a layer off. If you are too cold, you can put a layer on. Access to warm up or cool down rooms. So if you're working in a hot condition, you should have a place where you can go and cool down and change that temperature, bring your body back to its natural temperature before you have to go back out and work. If you're working in a cold environment, foot or hand warmers is probably going to be a good idea for you. And wearing breathable clothing, not just for the summer, but for the winter as well. Those cold temperatures, if you start to sweat underneath and the clothing is not moisture wicking, then you hold on to that water and it can actually make you a little bit colder. And the last thing I want to talk to you about today is contact stress. And that's just a result from continuous contact between a hard or sharp object and a sensitive tissue on the body. So these tissues could be the palm of your hands, your fingers, your wrists. If you think about using a keyboard again, if you don't have a wrist rest, you rest your wrists on your desk itself. The corner of your desk is sharp. It'll cut into that soft tissue in your wrist a little bit, restricts the blood flow, and that will eventually lead to muscle fatigue in whatever part of your body is not getting enough blood flow. Other examples are using a screwdriver, right? You have to grip it, the screwdriver is hard, palm of your hand is soft, so the harder you grip, the more force you're putting into that soft tissue. So some solutions, you want to try not to use your limbs as a striking tool. We've all smacked something with our hand and thought, oh, that didn't feel very nice. So trying to avoid that, that is still a contact stress, even if it's not prolonged. Reducing your grip force, so like I talked about with the screwdriver, trying not to grip it as tightly will reduce some of the contact stress. Use padding or anything that you can get to act as padding. So kneeling pad, for example, if you're kneeling, it just will increase that surface area, take some of the pressure off one specific point in your body. Follow the recommended ergonomic changes if you've had somebody come in and do an assessment. And then another example would be that wrist rest, those jelly, foamy rests that go on your desk. Lets you put your wrists down, takes away that sharp edge, gives a little bit of cushioning for the soft tissue. So now that you know what the risks are, you kind of understand them a little bit better, what can you do? Well, you can get familiar with the MSD hazards in your workplace. You can look back on the video that Brandon's going to post or find whatever resources are available to you to further understand the risks. You want to take your time to assess the work area. Even if you've been there for 10 years, chances are something in your work area has changed. So take a minute and just take a look around, know what risks you're going to be exposed to throughout your day. You want to have a well-documented MSD program so that you can keep track of where the risks were and if they've been dealt with or if they need to be dealt with. You want to try and implement MSD-specific tools and training. Training will just help workers to understand the more specific risks at their work site. Encourage workers to report MSD hazards. I know sometimes people don't want to say or they're maybe not comfortable bringing it forward, but having that open environment so that you can maintain a good conversation around MSDs. Because if we stop talking about it, then it stops being addressed and the risks don't change. So putting it all together, the success of an organization's MSD prevention program is based on a few things. The development and improvement of the MSD prevention program. I mentioned that there's new information and technologies coming out all the time, so trying to stay up to date or using whatever resources you have to keep updating your program. You want to keep an ongoing MSD recognition or assessment program, just so that you can keep up with the changing work environment. And again, maintaining that positive workplace safety culture, keeping the conversation open, keeping it so that if there is a risk, maybe a new one that's been brought up or an old one that is yet to be dealt with, you can talk about it and find a good solution together, working together to make sure that these risks are mitigated. So with that, I want to thank you all for attending. And I would take any questions.
Kelsey, that was a really good presentation. Actually, a lot of tips I think that I'll even take forward. And there's a lot of things. When you think about MSDs, a lot of times it's not an immediate risk, right? So not a lot of people are actively trying to find a way to prevent it because you're not in immediate harm all the time. But I think once you do have an injury like that, you realize how debilitating, how painful it actually is. And so, I mean, even just driving, so it's a good point about the driving, how it's such an easy task and you don't think you're working hard, but it can hurt your body for sure. Yeah. Is there any questions here from the live audience?
Yeah. Is there something you can do to improve your own workspace right now to that podium and you don't get injured if you spend a lot of time?
Absolutely. If I had access to a footstool, I would be standing on one right now. It's a little bit too tall for me. I'm reaching up. And if I had to do a lot of work here, I would be trying to find something to stand on for sure.
Should probably figure that one out ourselves.
We have an online question. Can you speak to age impact on susceptibility to an MSD?
So there is a lot of research out there. I'm not very familiar with age impact, but I do know that the general consensus is as you age, you're a little bit more susceptible just because of the natural muscle loss that our bodies go through as we age. So generally a little bit weaker, but it's something I would have to look into a little more.
Anyone else here? No? All right, well, even for those online, feel free, if questions do come up, you can always email croshtech@laurentian.ca, or if you visit our website, you'll see other email addresses. Chelsea's is up there on the screen right now. And as I said before, this will be posted online, so you should be able to find it under our resources tab. We have a comment here that a good resource is msdprevention.com. It's the guideline for Ontario, the MSD prevention guideline for Ontario. Peg has posted that link there for everyone online, so that thank you for that, Peg, for sharing that. It is a good resource. And another question just came in before we wrap it up. I saw that most of your solutions were not following the hierarchy of control. They're starting with the PPEs instead of engineering control. So, comment on that.
So they weren't in any one order the way I listed them there. My idea is to try and start with what you can do. Engineering controls take a long time generally to come into effect, so you want to try and mitigate your risks in the process of having those engineering controls come in. That's how I kind of base my tips coming in, but definitely try and follow that hierarchy.
Perfect. Okay, Les, yeah.
So when you were talking about the network actions,
Yeah.
you mentioned 50%. So if you do something, same thing 50% of the time, then there's a risk. Where does the 50%?
That's just like textbook. I've pulled it from a few different websites. I can't remember now specifically which one it was, but I can find it for you if you want. That's just kind of the general rule of thumb that I've come across over time and through a little bit of schooling. So that's just one way. There's a bunch of different ways. It is really, really hard to quantify repetitive movement.
Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you again, Chelsea. And thank you everyone online for joining us as well.